Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine the world around, say, the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. Just massive upheaval, right?
Absolutely. You've got industrialization completely changing how people live and work.
Cities are booming, population shifting.
And politically, you see democracies rising, but also old powers clinging on. It's a real mix.
And it's out of this fertile, maybe chaotic ground that our story today really springs, the birth of mass culture.
Yeah, and you, our listener, pointed us towards some key sources on the thinkers who first really grappled with this, the Frankfurt School.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Get into their story. It's quite a dramatic narrative, actually. Their hopes, their fears.
And they're really sharp critiques of the culture industry that, still echoes today. We've got material that introduces their main ideas, the key players.
People like Theodore Wiesengrund, Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Walter Benjamin.
Herbert Marcuse, Jürgen Habermas later on. And even thinkers looking back, like Douglas Kellner, who talks about media culture. Exactly. So think of this as a journey back to understand how mass-produced culture became such a huge force.
Not just, background noise or fun, but something shaping how we understand everything.
Right. So settle in. Let's unravel this. Where does the story kick off?
Well, the setting is Frankfurt am Main, Germany, back in the 1920s. That's where the Institute for Social Research gets founded.
The intellectual birthplace of the Frankfurt School, essentially.
That's it. And the backdrop is what we just talked about. Rapid industrial growth, big monopolies forming, technology becoming more powerful.
And these thinkers, they're asking a really fundamental question, aren't they?
Yeah, it's kind of the elephant in the room for them. Why hadn't the big revolutionary changes that some theories predicted actually happened, especially in these, advanced industrial countries?
And why did it feel like discussions about, say, social class were sort of fading away from the public conversation?
It's interesting because their intellectual roots were really deep in thinkers like Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Antonio Gramsci. They were trying to understand that disconnect using critical theory.
And the people right at the heart of this were figures like Max Horkheimer. He became the Institute's director in 1930.
And Theodore Wiesengrund, Adorno, who worked very closely with him, plus others who became really influential later.
And they're watching this new phenomenon explode. Mass media.
Newspapers everywhere, radio becoming common, the first films.
Right, and their first big collective statement on this dialectic of Enlightenment from 1947, it wasn't exactly enthusiastic, was it?
No,
Yeah.
It was deeply critical. They looked at this whole system, film, pop music like jazz, all this mass entertainment.
Which they termed the cultural industry.
Exactly. And they saw it not as innocent fun, but as a system built for profit, built for market dominance.
For Adorno and Horkheimer, this felt like a betrayal almost, a reversal of what the Enlightenment was supposed to bring.
Yeah, the promise was liberation, reason, critical thought. But they argued the cultural industry did the opposite. It fostered passivity.
Made the public, well, easier to manage, less likely to question things.
That was their fear, that people become unable to resist media influence, easily manipulated. And you have to remember...
Their experience in Germany?
Right. Their direct experience with Nazi propaganda powerfully shaped this view. They saw how potent mass media could be for control.
Okay, so let's zoom in on this cultural industry concept. Adorno and Horkheimer coined it like show business today, maybe?
Sort of, yeah, but with a much sharper critical edge. Adorno especially went after the standardization he saw.
Particularly in music.
Oh, definitely. He's talking about popular music, hits being produced like on a conveyor belt.
Implying it all sounds the same.
Yeah.
Manufactured.
Exactly. He felt this sameness stifled any real artistic expression or innovation. He called it a dream factory. But, the dreams were being scripted by the producers, not the audience.
It wasn't about art, it was about selling.
That's a key part of Adorno's argument. He talked about standardization and also pseudo-individualization. Little superficial differences that make products seem unique, but aren't fundamentally.
Like branding, maybe?
Kind of. And he argued this whole process turned culture into just another commodity. Its value wasn't the experience it offered, its use value.
But its price tag, its exchange value.
Precisely. The ability to be bought and sold became paramount. Think about a hit song you pay to download it. That's exchange value. The actual feeling or insight it gives you, that's use value. Adorno worried the exchange value was crushing the use value. Profit over art.
Okay, now let's bring in Herbert Marcuse. His famous work, One-Dimensional Man. What was his angle?
Marcuse painted this picture of society creating false needs. Desires that aren't inherent, but are manufactured and pushed on us by, Well, by the media, by the whole system.
Needs for things we don't really need.
Exactly. And he argued these media weren't just reflecting society, they were tools of domination. They helped create this one-dimensional society, meaning a society where people lose the ability to think critically, to imagine alternatives outside the established way of doing things. You just accept the reality presented.
Wow. And he also talked about a collective ego.
Yeah, in his earlier work, Eros and Civilization, he suggested mass media, radio, TV back then were setting the norms, the values for everyone.
And if you didn't fit in,
You faced rejection, exclusion. The media helped enforce conformity.
it's quite a powerful critique. Marcuse also argued that even technology, which we often see as progress,
Right, he saw it as potentially another form of control. The very efficiency and comfort of modern industrial society could, paradoxically, make people less critical.
lulling them into acceptance.
Yeah, this one-dimensional consciousness where alternatives just don't even seem possible. It's unsettling, the idea that our wants might be manufactured.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift to Walter Benjamin. His essay on art and mechanical reproduction is really famous.
The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction from 1935. Hugely influential. He introduced this concept of aura.
Aura. What did he mean by that?
It's that unique quality an original artwork has. Its presence in time and space, its history, its authenticity. Think of seeing the actual Mona Lisa versus a poster.
The poster doesn't have the same feeling, the same authority.
Exactly. Benjamin argued that technologies like photography and film, because they're all about making copies, inevitably erode this aura.
And this changes how we experience art.
Fundamentally, the focus shifts from the unique original to the reproducible copy. From quiet contemplation, maybe, to mass exhibition shock value.
He also made a really interesting point about movie stars, didn't he?
He did. He suggested the whole cult of the personality around film stars was a kind of compensation.
For the lost aura.
Yeah. Since the film itself is endlessly reproducible, they manufactured a new kind of aura around the actor, the star image. A substitute uniqueness.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You lose the unique object, so you create a unique personality.
It shows how the industry adapted, creating new forms of allure to fit the new technology. It's a really astute observation about how culture was changing.
So the Frankfurt School wasn't static, though. It evolved. What about the next generation, like Jürgen Habermas?
Right, Habermas is considered second generation. He's still critical, definitely operating in that tradition, but he introduces some different angles, some nuances.
His big work is the structural transformation of the public sphere.
That's the one, from 1962. He was really interested in public discourse. How can people have rational, open debates to make collective decisions?
So the conditions for a healthy democracy, essentially.
Pretty much. He looked at how the ideal of a public sphere, where citizens could debate freely, emerged historically, but also how it was being eroded.
By mass media, among other things?
Yes, he saw the potential for commercialization and manipulation to degrade public debate, turning citizens into passive consumers of information.
But unlike maybe Adorno or Horkheimer, he saw some potential for positive use, for genuine communication.
He did. He was focused on the conditions for undistorted communication. How could we create spaces where people could reach genuine consensus through argument, free from power imbalances or manipulation? So, still critical, but also searching for possibilities.
A bit more maybe hopeful, or at least looking for pathways forward.
Perhaps. It's a focus on communication itself as a potential site of resistance or rationality, which is a slightly different emphasis.
And then we move even further forward to thinkers like Douglas Kellner. He talks about media culture. How does that update the picture?
Kellner, you could say, is third generation. He takes these critical ideas right into our contemporary hyper-mediated world.
So beyond just TV and radio, into the digital age.
Absolutely. He argues that media, the images, sounds, spectacles that constantly surround us aren't just reflecting our lives anymore. They are actively producing our lives.
Wow, okay. Producing them how?
Well, media culture dominates our free time, right? It shapes our political views, how we vote, what we think is important.
And our identities, too.
Crucially, yes. Kellner argues media is a major source for how we construct who we are, our sense of class, ethnicity, race, nationality, gender, sexuality. All these categories are constantly being defined and redefined through media representations.
He talks about technocapitalism, too. What's that about?
It emphasizes the deep connection between this media culture, advanced technology, and the drive for profit. It's an industrial force, a global one now.
So the Frankfurt School's concerns about commercialization are still very much alive.
According to Kellner, Yes, and perhaps even more pervasive. Media culture is constantly churning out new identities, new trends, influencing our attitudes, all tied into this technocapitalist system.
Looking back at the Frankfurt School's work overall, there's a definite tone, isn't there? A sort of pessimism,
Yeah, that's hard to miss. There's a strong sense in much of their work, especially the earlier stuff, that the mechanisms of mass culture are incredibly powerful.
almost inescapable.
Yeah,
Like they saw it as effectively controlling people.
there's certainly that thread. Enslaving the masses, maybe putting it strongly, but definitely fostering conformity and making real social change or resistance very difficult.
That fear of the one-dimensional society that Marcuse talked about seems central.
Very much so. The worry that society loses its ability to think critically about itself,
Mm.
to imagine alternatives.
But their whole approach, their story, it hasn't gone unchallenged, right? There have been criticism.
Oh, definitely. Over the years, scholars have pushed back on some aspects.
Like what?
Well, one major criticism is that their claims, especially about the audience being totally passive and manipulated, were often quite speculative.
Not based on, like, studies of actual audiences.
Right. More philosophical critique than empirical research, critics would say. They argue the Frankfurt School didn't really account for how audiences actively interpret, resist, or even play with media messages.
It wasn't just a one-way street, audience soaking it all up.
Later media studies really emphasized audience activity. Also, their model was very focused on capitalist media. They didn't say as much about media in other kinds of systems or alternative media.
And did they offer solutions? Ways to fight back against this cultural industry?
That's another critique, that they were very good at diagnosing the problem, but less clear on offering concrete solutions or strategies for change. The pessimism, perhaps, made that difficult.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into this really quite dramatic story of the Frankfurt School and mass culture, what stands out? What resonates now?
For me, it's the enduring power of their central questions. Even if you disagree with some of their conclusions or their tone.
The questions they raised about culture, power, technology, conformity, they still feel incredibly relevant, don't they?
Absolutely. Think about their concept of the cultural industry, or Kellner's media culture, in the age of social media, streaming algorithms, influencers.
Are we more susceptible now? Less. It's complicated.
It is. Are the mechanisms of standardization and control they worried about just taking new forms? Or does digital media offer more avenues for genuine expression and resistance?
Yeah, the story isn't over. Their narrative provides this essential background, this critical lens for understanding our own mediated world.
It's a powerful reminder to constantly question the cultural forces shaping us. Even if their outlook was often bleak, the act of asking those critical questions is vital.
So we hope this dive gave you, our listener, a good sense of this crucial chapter. We really encourage you to explore their work further.
And think about how their ideas play out today. Like, what does aura even mean in a digital world of NFTs or unique digital artifacts? How are algorithms shaping identity in ways Benjamin or Adorno couldn't have foreseen?
Loads to think about. It's an ongoing story, and understanding the Frankfurt School's perspective is, I think, a really important part of figuring it out.